The CIA are your friends. They won't drug you and they won't torture you.
So that was a fucking lie.
Today we are going to be talking about Project MK Ultra, the CIA's drug and torture experiments on unknowing United States and Canadian civilians. Before we start, if you're new here, hello, and if you're returning, it's good to see you again. Alright, let's get into it. For those who don't know, Project MK Ultra, in short, was illegal human experiments conducted by the CIA with the mission to identify drugs and procedures that would weaken people and force confessions in interrogations, by the means of brainwashing, physical torture, sexual abuse, and just torture in general. Using methods like giving LSD or other psychoactive drugs, electroshock, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, and all types of abuse. Importantly, the project would drug United States and Canadian citizens without their consent or knowledge. The project lasted for 20 years, and 2 years after ending, in 1975, it was revealed to the public by the Church Committee and the Rockefeller Commission, with more information becoming declassified later. 2 deaths have been attributed to MK Ultra, however it is likely many more. But with thousands of documents destroyed, and those responsible never facing justice, not much is known about the victims. So how did MK Ultra come to be? In a sentence, it was a reaction to Soviet and communism threats. MK Ultra's idea started towards the end of the Korean War. Many returning American POWs supposedly came back altered. The Korean War went from 1950 to 1953, within the Cold War, which spanned from 1947 to 1991. This was when fear of communism in the United States was rampant, known as the Red Scare. Well, Second Red Scare. There were fears that the returning POWs had been converted to the beliefs of communism through brainwashing. Some American soldiers refused to return home at all, supposedly due to brainwashing. And many returning GIs accused America of using germ warfare against the communists. Germ warfare is biological warfare. Now obviously the US denied the claims, and the newly appointed director of the CIA was focused on getting ahead of the news of brainwashing. Alan Dulles was appointed as the director of the CIA on April 10, 1953. After appointed, he gave a speech to a group of Princeton alumni, in which he says, "In the past few years, we have become accustomed to hearing much about the battle for men's minds, the war of ideologies. I wonder, however, whether we clearly perceive the magnitude of the problem, whether we realize how sinister the battle for men's minds has become in Soviets' hands. We might call it in its new form, brain warfare." He pointed out the returning American POWs and their altered states as examples. 3 days after Dole's speech, Project MK Ultra was created. Through the stories of American soldiers, as well as the words from the CIA, brainwashing swept over the public masses. And for the public, it was much easier to blame brainwashing for the reason so many countries fell into communism, creating the extreme uprising in communism. There was also many news stories as well as famous literature, like the Manchurian Candidate, that began to delve into brain warfare. However, America began drug interrogation programs in 1943, famously trying to get the quote-unquote truth serum. In 1947, the United States Navy initiated Project Chatter. This was when they gave LSD to subjects for interrogations. So the CIA was influenced by America during the war, and America was influenced by the people who did inhumane experiments in their death camps. Now, I'm not saying MK Ultra was a continuation of the Nazi experiments, but Stephen Kinzer, an American author, journalist, and reporter, is. America was already looking into different ways to get ahead of their enemies. This includes drug and brain warfare, and communism was a great way to justify their work. MK Ultra began on the order of the CIA director Alan Dulles, but the project was headed by Sidney Gottlieb. Sidney was also infamously involved in the plot to assassinate Fidel Castro. Sidney brought up the idea of the poisoned cigar, trying to get rid of Castro's beard through thallium, as well as spraying Castro's fields with LSD. This man was very fond of LSD. In fact, the CIA in whole drooled at the thought of LSD. Through documents gained under the Freedom of Information Act, it shows in 1953, the CIA considered purchasing 10 kilograms of LSD, which is about 100 million doses. That purchase never went through. However, the CIA did purchase some LSD from pharmaceutical companies in Switzerland. The defense of buying the 10 kilograms of LSD would have been to get them out of foreign hands. But again, they didn't buy that amount, that we know of. For MK Ultra, LSD was administered to many different types of people. They gave dosages to mentally ill patients, drug addicts, prisoners, and prostitutes, those who the CIA deemed as people easier to manipulate, but also to their own agents, military members, and other federal agents, as well as to the public, hoping that the LSD will make subjects open up to deep confessions or just wiping their memories clean. A big reason a lot of these people never came out is because they never knew, or they had been told about the experiment, just not the LSD part. As for the federal employees, military personnel were threatened with court-martials if they ever came out with the information. The CIA were keen on keeping this a secret. Diving deeper into Project MK Ultra, it was 162 projects contracted out to various universities and research foundations. While being funded by the CIA, over 80 institutions didn't know they were working with the CIA, just like most of the people who participated in experiments didn't know they were being drugged. Under MK Ultra, the CIA granted themselves authority to research how drugs promote the intoxication of alcohol, make hypnosis easier, make people withstand torture longer, produce amnesia, shock, and confusion. Pretty much any experiment that will tell them how biological and chemical materials will alter a human, they tried. That was the point of the project, although other motivations sprouted from within. Like the truth serum. The so-called truth serum was a multitude of different drugs. Sometimes LSD, sometimes anesthetics. But all in the hope that it can get information out of unwilling people. The CIA also knew how the public would react, hence all the secrecy and threat of punishment to those who knew about it. We'll talk about the lengths the CIA went to later to avoid prosecution, cause oh boy. Many tests were done to people who had mental disabilities, prisoners, cancer patients, drug addicts, and all different types of people that Sidney Gottlieb said were people who could not fight back. And for those who supposedly could fight back, they just drugged without them knowing. While many different types of drugs were used in MK Ultra, like heroin or meth, Sidney loved his LSD. The LSD also made the project less into a defensive reaction to other countries and into more of an offensive weapon. The CIA had hoped that the LSD could give them control over someone else's body, like one of those thumbs in the Spy Kids movies. MK Ultra had many different types of torture methods. For the drugs they were handing out, sometimes researchers would expose someone to 2 different types of drugs that had the opposite effects. Think like taking cocaine as a stimulant and then taking Xanax as a sedative right after, which from what I've heard just makes you go to sleep. Researchers also gave their victims legal substances like alcohol or normal prescription drugs, only to then dose them with other drugs, usually LSD. When they would use hypnosis, they would usually try to create fear that could then be exploited to gain information. Donald Cameron would drug his patients, then play noises or suggestions over tapes repeatedly while the victim was comatose from the drugs. And importantly, Donald Cameron was one of the experimenters who would travel to Canada to experiment on Canadian citizens. Cameron had hoped to correct schizophrenia by erasing memories to reprogram a person's mind. Ultimately, it left its victims comatose for months, sometimes suffering from amnesia. You gotta wonder what information led to Cameron thinking that this would work. That is, if he was actually trying to accomplish something rather than just torture some innocent civilian. But the CIA wouldn't do that. What they would do is commission a sensory deprivation tank to create a stimuli-free world, then dose subjects with LSD and then throw them in there. This is just a couple of examples of some of the ways researchers would conduct their experiments. Of course, examples from documents that weren't destroyed. A project within MK Ultra was Operation Midnight Climax. This is where the CIA set up brothels and agency safe houses with the goal to attract men who might be hesitant to talk about their brothel experiences. These men would go into a room with a one-way mirror, given LSD, and then were observed while doing their, thing. All unknown to them, sometimes the incidents were recorded. This was only one of the projects within MK Ultra where citizens were given LSD without their knowledge. It was led by the same man who led MK Ultra, Sidney Gottlieb. Sidney had the same goal with the operation as MK Ultra: gain the upper hand in drug and brain warfare. He was just testing that out through men trying to have fun times at brothels, which is fucking weird. The only results I could find from this operation was from an officer who oversaw the experiments. He said, "No one knows where they are now or what effects they may have suffered." The official results of the operation have never been released. One of the 2 official deaths from Project MK Ultra is Frank Olson. Frank Rudolph Olson served as a captain in the U.S. Army Chemical Corps. This was during World War II. Through that organization, Olson would be involved in secret biological warfare laboratories. Olson had also worked under Operation Paperclip. This was when the United States hired Nazi scientists to become government workers. Olson had personally worked with ex-Nazis to figure out the utilization of gas anthrax. Frank Olson was discharged from the army in 1944, where afterwards he remained on civilian contract. There, Olson would be involved in numerous secret operations, like Operation Harness, which was testing toxic clouds on animals. Operation Sea Spray, where bacterium was released in the coastal mists of San Francisco, affecting all of San Francisco's population, as well as Project Artichoke, a CIA interrogation program to find if someone can involuntarily assassinate someone else. This is all to show that Frank Olson had major ties with the CIA and secret operations. So when the CIA proposed Project MK Ultra, Olson was on board. MK Ultra administered LSD to everyone, including their own. On November 20th, 1958, a retreat with people closely involved in MK Ultra took place in a cabin at Deep Creek Lake. The retreat would hold 12 participants to take the truth drug, which is just LSD. Frank Olson was one of those participants. After the drugging, Olson and others who had been involved were seen as disoriented, and were questioning themselves at work. 4 days after the drugging, Olson had been taken to New York City with a CIA chemist and a co-worker for psychiatric treatment. There were fears that Frank Olson would hurt people around him, and Olson had also agreed to the treatment. On November 28th, 1958, 8 days after the drugging, Frank Olson and Robert Lashbrook were staying together in the room at the Statler Hilton Hotel. That morning, Frank Olson was supposedly hurl himself out the closed window and curtains, plummeting to the concrete below. Olson would die shortly after impact, after trying to mumble something to the night manager. Police found Robert Lashbrook on the toilet with his hands on his head. Lashbrook told the police he was asleep and woken up to a noise. Olson's death had been attributed to from a nervous breakdown, until 1975, when the Church Committee and the Rockefeller Commission revealed information about MKUltra. His family then sued and settled with the government for $750,000. It is highly speculated that Olson had not voluntarily hurled himself out that window that night. His breakdown after the drugging was when Project MKUltra was still running and in complete secrecy. Olson had also been known to speak his mind, and people believed that this frightened the CIA, leading them to suggest psychiatric treatment in New York, surrounded by CIA agents, where then they threw him out the window to keep him quiet. But hey, that's just a theory. MKUltra had so many victims, and I want to mention some of the famous, or rather infamous, victims. Whitey Bulger was an organized crime boss based in Massachusetts. In 1957, Bulger was in the Atlanta Penitentiary where he had been a subject to MKUltra. Bulger claimed that he had been injected with LSD and was interrogated with leading questions like, "Would you ever kill anyone?" Bulger would write about an experiment involving himself and 8 other convicts, stating, "We experienced horrible periods of nightmares and even blood coming out the walls. Guys turning into skeletons in front of me. I saw a camera change into the head of a dog. I felt like I was going insane." Ted Kaczynski, aka the Unabomber, was a Harvard student who attended in the late 50s and early 60s. Prime time for MKUltra. From my research, Ted Kaczynski was involved in mock interrogations that would harshly disparage his beliefs. Kaczynski states that he felt he had been pressured into participating. The interrogations were held in a basement, where they would be wired up to a heart monitor and brutally interrogated about their beliefs. The CIA was testing what a human's breaking point would be, thus subsequently creating a terrorist. MKUltra didn't just create a terrorist, it also created a cult leader. Charles Manson was allegedly part of MKUltra. Now, hard allegedly on this one. There's an argument that Manson was involved in MKUltra because he was in prison during the prime time for the experiments. He also had a ton of ties with the FBI, too many to even start to go over in this video, but it was a huge reason he was released from prison so many times before the whole cult thing. Manson was also prevalent in San Francisco around the same time MKUltra was. And finally, he used the same tactics on his followers as the CIA did to their victims. He would get hitchhikers or people who supposedly didn't have any roots, then isolate them, and then use drugs as a means to hook them. Not just to the addiction, but also to his words. Essentially controlling their minds. There's a whole book that goes into this called Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. Now these are all allegations, mainly because the director of MKUltra, Sidney Gottlieb, seek to destroy all evidence of Project MKUltra, stating it would be a good idea if all the files were destroyed. And they would have gotten away with it too, if it wasn't for that one pesky leftover cache. Spoilers, they did get away with it, but at least we have proof that the shady shit was going on. MKUltra officially ended in 1973. The experiments themselves halted in 1972. However, people inside the CIA, as well as the CIA inspector staff, began squeezing the neck of the project at the earliest of 1963. It would take the New York Times releasing a report in 1974 claiming the CIA conducted illegal activities on domestic citizens, as well as public tension from the Watergate scandal, had gotten the Church Committee to launch their official investigation. Their investigation, led by Frank Church, was then turned over to the Rockefeller Commission. In 1975, the two organizations went public with the fact that the CIA was conducting experiments on unknowing citizens. They also revealed some details about Frank Olson, the agent that died from quote-unquote nervous breakdown turned. The Church Committee and Rockefeller Commission provided the files that weren't destroyed. With the information that was released, there really wasn't much pointing towards those responsible. Sidney Gottlieb, the head of MKUltra, had retired 2 years prior to all the information coming out, and when he was finally questioned, he claimed he couldn't recollect anything, because of course he did. When asked what he learned from the experiments, he dismissed what he had done as useless. Later hearings would bring the CIA agents who had been involved in MKUltra, but that led nowhere, as they all supposedly couldn't remember much about MKUltra. Unfortunately, there isn't really a happy ending to this whole situation, so I wanted to highlight the little speck of good that is there. Frank Church led the Church Committee's investigation into MKUltra and the CIA. The Rockefeller Commission was able to support their investigation to release to the public. So yes, we did just go over so much of the bad things that these people in power can do. But there are also people in power who still hold their morals, and did what was right. If there's any light to be had in this story, it lies with those involved uncovering the heinous acts of the CIA. I'm going to link the document the CIA has officially released. But if you are really interested in this, look into other sources. If you have any information to add on, feel free to leave a comment. And if you enjoyed this video and learned something, please leave a like. Alright, bye.